Hey guys, welcome back to my channel. Today I kind of want to do a more deep dive into monitors and kind of what all the specs mean, the attributes of a monitor and what that means for you as a consumer. I did a lot of this kind of stuff early on with my very first PC build segment. This is kind of a continuation of that. So we're going to jump right in. I'm going to explain to you, I'm going to tell you what I'm going to be talking about, and then I'll kind of go into those details, and then at the end I'll kind of wrap up and say, as a consumer, what you really care about. All right, so first off, we have LED versus LCD screens, the sizes of the screen, TN, IPS, VA panels, G-Sync versus FreeSync, what Hertz means or FPS, the response time, curvature ratings, the brightness, typically known as candelas per square meter, or the nits, and then last but not least, we have aspect ratio. So I'm going to kind of go into detail of each one of these, give you guys some graphics when I can, and then I'll tell you what all of it means at the end for you as a consumer. LEDs and LCDs, it's the same in your TV as it is in your monitor. So if you know it, then it kind of goes across the board. So you typically are in our current state, we have pretty much three styles. So LEDs, LCDs, and OLEDs or OLEDs. So LED stands for light emitting diode. That's just the actual light behind the monitor, behind the pixels that is doing it. So it's just using an LED light to push the light. An LCD panel is using a fluorescent light to pump through the pixels. So an LCD stands for liquid crystal display. And so every single LED, well, for the most part, every LED is going to be a liquid crystal display, just using an LED to be the light source. Whereas an LCD, not all of them are LEDs, because if they don't use an LED backlight, then it is simply an LCD. So OLED is the only real difference. These are organic light emitting diodes, and the pixels themselves actually emit their own light. So that is why they're kind of special. It allows them to be completely off. There's no backlight, so you get the blackest of blacks because there's truly no light coming from there. It's very nice, but these are a little iffy. The color gamut on them is a little different, and also the brightness of the screens are typically dimmer, and they just don't, because they're not emitting as much light. So OLED is kind of the future where you're getting into those really detailed screens, but for the most part you can get LED, LCD. You're pretty much going to see LEDs from now on. That's just how it works. So moving on, there are two screen sizes. So you range from about 19 inches up into, I think the CES of 2020 announced like a 49-inch screen, which is essentially just a TV, but they do not have the height. So it's 19 to about 30 is about a regular monitor. They don't have necessarily special names for them, but most people are going to fall in between about 24 to 30. And there's weird ones in there. I'd say there's typically 24s and 27s, 32s. Those are kind of the standard ones, but in between those sizes, there's 23 and a half, 24 and a half, 25 inch. So it doesn't really mean a whole lot. It's just the distance from one corner of the screen to the other corner of the screen. So it gets a little wonky when they're doing curvatures in there, which I can lead right into. So with curvatures, it's currently about a 1800R up into a 4000R. So the R stands for the radius. So essentially an 1800R is a really tight curve, and then as you go out, your radius is getting larger and larger and larger, so you're getting less bend in the screen. they just announced at CES 2020 this year a 1500R, which is a really aggressive curve on the screen, which is probably good for gamers. The tighter the curve, the more immersive it is and the less eye strain you get. So when gaming, it is actually a pretty nice feature to have something like an 1800R curved gaming monitor like the MSI one I reviewed not too long ago. So with that kind of leads into the aspect ratios. So typically right now, most things are going to be either a 16:9 aspect ratio, a 21:9 aspect ratio, or the 3:2 aspect ratio has been coming about with more handheld stuff. So with a 16:9, that just essentially means that it's a standard monitor length. So you're going to have 16 tall and 9 wide. That's just kind of what the picture is working with, and a lot of things are working into a 16:9 aspect ratio, whereas when you get to 21, you're just stretching out those 16 into 21, so you kind of get almost a distorted image sometimes if it's not properly rated for that. Honestly, most things are going to come as a 16:9, unless you're going into your ultra wides and things like that. That's where you're going to get into your kind of odd pixel or your aspect ratios. So it's not a huge deal for the average consumer. It's really kind of a back end deal. So with screen resolutions, we have 1080p, 1440p/2K. It's the same thing, and then 4K, 5K with Apple's Retina stuff, and then they've dabbled into 8K stuff, but we don't really have anything that runs 8K, so it's kind of ridiculous. Maybe in the future it'll be better, but so 1080p is your standard high definition. So that's what most TVs that aren't 4K are going to be running at. So 1080p just means that there is 1080 pixels in the height of your screen. 1440 means there's 1440 pixels in between, and then 4K is a little bit of a lie. It's actually 2000 pixels tall, and it's really 4000 pixels wide. That's why 2K is 1440, because it's 2000 pixels wide and 1400 pixels tall. 1080p is technically 1920 by 1080, so it's 1080 1920. So that's kind of just a breakdown. Essentially, as your pixel density goes up, you're packing those things tighter and tighter and tighter, so the clarity of your image can get better and better and better. So as you get really detailed imaging, that's when you're going to have those 4K where your pixels are so close together that you're getting really crisp images. So that's kind of what that means. Another thing I want to cover really quick is the G-Sync versus FreeSync. So earlier in one of my videos, one of you guys commented about what the G-Sync FreeSync differences. Essentially, G-Sync is NVIDIA's frame smoother program. They install a chip directly into the monitors themselves, and so you can only use G-Sync if you have an NVIDIA graphics card. Essentially, the monitor is going to be using the chipset that it was installed with in manufacturing, and that will allow for smoother frames, and it just keeps the screen from tearing is what they call it. So that's like if you were moving quickly across the screen, sometimes you can almost see the jumping between the frames, and it literally looks like your screen is splitting for just a split second. So it helps with that. And then FreeSync is AMD's version. For a long time, it was only G-Sync and only FreeSync, and whatever graphics card you had, you chose that monitor. Currently, if you get a FreeSync monitor, NVIDIA now has updated most of their stuff, and you can use FreeSync monitors. It isn't quite as perfect, and G-Sync is kind of a better system because your monitor is doing it, rather than in FreeSync, your graphics card is actually doing the work and not the monitor. So it is a little nicer to have the G-Sync if you have an NVIDIA card. If you have a G-Sync monitor and you only have an AMD card, you're kind of SOL. I'm sure there's some workarounds and abilities to try and figure it out, but for the most part, you're going to want to kind of stick to a G-Sync monitor, to an NVIDIA graphics card. But really all they do is help smooth out your frames and keep your screen from tearing. And that's really all it is. All right, and now we can go into frame rates. So we have, typically you're gonna hear them as either FPS or frames or hertz. So all of it's the same, and they're gonna be in numbers. So a 60 hertz monitor means that it can refresh a pixel 60 times in 1 second. So it can turn that pixel on and off 60 times in a second. The faster you go, so as you go to 120, 144, 160, 200, 244, they just announced, I think, a 360 hertz monitor at CES. Essentially, what you're doing is you're just flickering those, individual pixels faster, and it allows for, during movement in a game or editing or whatever it is, that you're not going to almost see the last pixel left over. So it just helps with the clarity of the image when you're moving, so you don't kind of see any broken images almost. So really they're all going to mean the same thing. FPS is frames per second, so it's all really essentially the same thing. Yeah, I believe it's a ROG Swift 360 hertz monitor is going to be coming out in 2020. Moving on to response times. This is one of the bigger deals. So with response times, we're talking the amount of time it takes a monitor to go from gray to gray. So from gray to another color to back to gray, and these are typically in millisecond timings. So you have 1 millisecond response, 5, 10 milliseconds. Pretty much nothing goes past 10. If you have anything past 10, that's really noticeable. 5 is kind of the very start of where you're going to start to notice it. 1 is where gamers like to be. 2 is fine. 4 is okay if you're doing light gaming. Competitive gamers are going to pretty much stick at 1 millisecond response times. It just keeps the amount of time within the game moving around and things like that. It just helps for your pixels not to almost backtrack and ghost, and you can almost see how they are not fast enough. It's almost like a lag. Brightness. So with brightness, monitors are typically rated in nits, or which is equivalent to a 1 candela per square meter. It's just in a standardized light emitting reading. You can actually buy sensors that tell you what candelas are being emitted. Essentially, this is going to be a pretty small problem. The brighter you get, the more vibrant your screen is going to be, but as long as you have, I think the starting is really going to be around 250 to 350 is where most monitors are going to sit at. And if you're in dark rooms, maybe it's nicer to have some where you're going to get really vibrant colors, but for the most part, you're going to kind of sit around a 350 and it's going to be perfectly fine, and you'll be fine. The only time it's going to really matter is if you're trying to work with HDR footage, because that requires a lot of nits to get the color output you need to actually be HDR. Once you get past your LED monitors, which is pretty much every one of them, then you're going to get into what type of panel it is. So there's TN, IPS, and VA. These are the main types of panels. TN is called Twisted Pneumatic. No one's ever going to call it that. You're just going to see it called a TN panel. Essentially, they are very fast response times, fast frames per second, because of the manufacturing of them. Typically, they're cheaper, but they don't have great color accuracy, and they don't have good viewing angles. So if you're coming at a computer from the side, or you sit a little cockeyed to your monitor, or maybe you're taller than your monitor and you're looking down on it, it will distort the colors that you're actually looking at, and it does look a little wonky, and you can definitely notice it. IPS monitors, in plane switching, you get really good color accuracy and good viewing angles, but for the most part, you don't get great frame rates and response times. That has been changing over time. Obviously, our manufacturing has been better and better. So Dell just released their 1 millisecond response time 1440p IPS monitor. Incredible monitor, but it's like $600 or $700. And really, when you're getting into the IPS that also has low refresh rates, response times and frames, you're going to be at a pretty penny for those. VA, or vertical alignment panels, are essentially the middle ground. So they have better color accuracy and angles than the the TN panels, but not as good as the IPS panels, and they have good response times and frames, but not as good as a TN. So you're kind of trading off. I'd say most average gamers are going to be playing on a TN panel that's LED. They're going to be at, honestly, if you can get to it, 144 hertz frames, and you're going to want as fast of a response time as you can get, which is pretty easy on a TN panel. You can get to 1 millisecond fairly easy, fairly cheap. And you're going to want, as a decently bright computer. You don't want it to be, a 150 nit computer, but that doesn't really happen that often, and any major brand isn't going to, short sell you like that. So really, if you're gaming, you're going to want a twisted pneumatic, your TN panels. If you want to edit footage, an IPS monitor is going to be the best for editing footage, because it's going to give you amazing color accuracy, especially if you're doing something like outdoor photography footage where the colors really matter. I mean, in a YouTube video, a distorted color is going to be okay. It's not going to kill you. But if you're doing some amazing, 4K video footage of, a beautiful landscape or something like that, and you really want those colors to pop, and you're editing those colors and things like that, that's when you want your IPS monitors with, as high as a resolution as you can get. And that's really going to be what those are for. VA panels are kind of going to be the middle ground. So if you can find a really nice VA panel that has, the features you're looking for, or if you do a mix of both, you're just dabbling into gaming, and you're also doing some, video editing, a VA panel is a great option, because you're kind of getting the best of both worlds. And they're okay on the budget, they're not crazy, but I think that it really depends on what you as a person, as a professional, hobbyist, whatever it is, are looking for. But I'd say TN is gaming, IPS is hardcore editing, and VA is if you're somewhere in the middle and you're kind of just looking for something that's gonna do what you want it to do. Thank you for watching. Like, subscribe, comment. Let me know what else you guys would like to see from me in the future. So I'd love to get some, suggestions and things you'd love to see. So thank you guys, and peace.